Michael, welcome back to another episode of Sets and Reps, right?
Yes.
Happy New Year. It's 2015, and this is going to be a teaser podcast, right? And our purpose is to, I think in a way what we're doing is we're essentially workshopping our topic for next week, aren't we?
A little bit, yeah. Throwing out some ideas. We've got an idea about how we want this to go into next week, so we'll bat around a few ideas between us on where we can take this topic and the ideas therein.
Right. So, I mean, our idea is we were working out a couple weeks ago and then kind of had this conversation about, what's more important? Is it important to be, for lack of a better term, like really book smart about something, or is it more important to have the experience about that topic? And I think it probably depends upon the discipline that a person's in, right? Very
true, yeah, because exercise science is going to be different, I think, than many other majors. Mm-hmm. You brought up some really good examples of...
Yeah, exercise science is unusual in that, if I'm going to be working in the field, if I'm a personal trainer, or if I'm a physical therapist that's using exercise science as a springboard into that career path, my knowledge of exercise science is going to hopefully shape who I am and how I live my life. I'm going to eat right, and I'm going to exercise. Those things become important to me. But if I'm in another career, those things I know about that field may not necessarily dictate how I live my life, right?
Right, yeah. I know we preach exercise is medicine quite a bit from the Surgeon General, but perhaps maybe a mathematician or a physicist, it's very difficult to really live. You can't just sit at home building bridges all the time out of toothpicks and be like, yes, this one will support 125 pounds. That was one I did in high school, by the way.
That's a good one. Nice job.
It was, yeah. The trick is you cut, for all of you high school physicists out there, the trick is cut the tips off them so you have two flat edges pushing against each other. It increases the stability.
Bigger surface area to kind of...
Yes, sir.
Makes sense, right?
Yep.
So exercise science is it's certainly not unique in this regard, but I think it is worth a discussion point to kind of look at. Because, if I really, really know a lot about exercise, if I read all the books I can about how to properly lift weights and the importance of running or doing cardiovascular activity, but if I never actually do those things, am I a better person for it? Right? I mean, that's what we're kind of getting at to some degree.
That's a good question. We see that a lot of times with people, what we call it, majoring the minors or however you want to phrase it, but where, you spend so much time designing the perfect program. Oh, this is going to be, optimizing my hormonal variations and what have you. So that way I'll be able to get the best gains possible. But then as you start to go through, you realize that perhaps German volume training, doing 10 sets of 10, isn't for you. It's not at all appropriate for you at this stage of your training life or cycle.
You figured it out by doing it yourself, and you determine that, whoa, this isn't what's written down, and the people that this is right for does not match what my own personal goals are. And we see this a lot of times in class where I'll ask students, beginning exercise science students or strength and conditioning students, like, oh, I want you to write a program for somebody. And this person happens to be a 50-year-old person who has been relatively sedentary the last 20 or 30 years of their life. And they'll write in things like, oh, I want them to do, 3 sets of 10 lunges or 2 sets of 10 or 2 sets of 12 step-ups. I'm not going to have them use any weight, and in their heads, there's like, oh, that's really easy because for them, they can do that, right?
Yeah.
But when you put yourselves in the mind and the body of a 50-year-old who hasn't been working out a whole lot, that's an exceptionally difficult thing to ask that person to really do.
Very true, especially if you're being told to do this by perhaps a younger person, somebody you're junior who you're already a little hesitant. They're supposed to be the professional. They're the the authority on this, but you're not really used to taking orders from somebody in that. And it compounds it, I think, if you don't really look like you know what you're talking about. I know I have friends that tried to go into personal training and, strong as an ox, big as a house, all of that. And sure, they get a couple of, male football players or weekend warriors that, they want to increase their muscle mass and all, but they don't get the, for lack of a better, housewives or the types that are normally going to be getting personal training, or the elderly or whoever's trying to get back into it don't know much
fit, but I don't want to be.
But I don't want to really look like you, And I guess being, for better or for worse, oftentimes you're judged by your appearance in exercise science, and not just words that come out of your mouth, but just what you look like. There's always that Seinfeld joke about you're walking through the grocery store and you see somebody looking good, and you're like,
"What do you eat?"
So what do you eat? Try and peer into their grocery cart and figure exactly how can I do that?
Right, as we said, it's not unique to exercise science. I think if we were going to our primary care physician and that person were horribly unhealthy, or you saw them outside smoking before you came, it's like you'd have you'd second guess a little bit maybe the advice they'd be giving you, right? Because it's like, let's person is not living the life that they're trying to tell me I should be living, right?
Well, I know I experienced that firsthand going over to do my PhD in Italy, where you do see people still smoking cigarettes in between classes on the front steps of the university that is dedicated to sport, exercise, endocrinology, and all that. And you see the professors as well as the students out there. It's it's kind of anachronistic where you're like, oh, where did I just trip back into 1940? Like, what's this? Like I've got that little picture in my room from Time Magazine about, I forget the brand of cigarettes, but more scientists and doctors recommend Kent, I believe, than anything else. And it's got like a decathlon athlete on there, this really opened up my lungs to win that. Of
course, that's triggering the memory of the classic John Belushi sketch where he's eating the little tiny chocolate donuts as he's preparing for the Olympics, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
But so I think that's kind of the issue that we want to get into next week, I guess, is the idea of our own practical experiences and what we know as far as research is concerned, and kind of, I guess, the appropriate blend of those two things in this field of exercise science, right?
Right, yeah. I think that would be a great topic to go into because it's very easy to kind of lose your way as you go through this. Focus too much on maybe the mechanisms of how things work and not enough of the experiential learning where you really get out there and do it yourself, the in-the-trenches learning where you're figuring out. Because I know that there aren't many textbooks written on how, or at least I've seen, there probably are some, that tell you how do you go from an 800-pound squat to a 900-pound squat. Because that's a wholly different animal in my experience of looking at power lifters and whatnot from going from a 300 to 400 pound or 4 to 5. I mean, there's just a different in the frequency, the training, your ability to do those things.
Yeah, and exercise science is still in its infancy. I mean, it's I think in a lot of ways still trying to figure out its identity. It's cribbed from a lot of other disciplines like physics and biology, and it's trying to kind of find its own place. And I think that balance has really not been met yet.
Right. I mean, it's only been about, I guess now it's 2015, so it's been about 20 years since that's even the more molecular approaches have been going on, since we started to figure out how to harness antibodies so we can figure out exactly what's changing in the body and not just measuring ventilation and how much CO2 did you produce and oxygen you consumed. So we're able to get these very specific answers, and it does go more mechanistic in that way, and it's very useful in some cases. We've seen an explosion of industries, supplements, pharmaceuticals, and otherwise that are all based on these findings. But how much does that really help you if you can't put that into practice? So being able to put these things into context and then go from either the bench top or in the lab to into the gym, so that way we can actually help people.
This plays into another idea that we've been dancing around for a couple of different podcasts. This idea that that practitioner oftentimes is ahead of the researcher. They're trying things out, figuring out what works in the gym or whatnot, and then the researcher's scrambling to kind of figure out, it's like, whoa, let me see if I can research that and figure out what's actually going on. And so it's a weird, and I assume it's like this in other disciplines as well, but we particularly see it in exercise science with coaching and things of that nature, in personal training, where it's like they're doing something that's totally maybe against or a novel idea of research that's going on. So let's try to figure out what's actually the mechanism behind it.
But in many cases, you don't see that in other disciplines, like in medicine, let's say, because your insurance company won't reimburse you for what's not best standard practice. So you can't just take this, off the wall approach. I got this, idea here about how to treat this disease. I don't know if it's going to work, but
they call that holistic medicine, I think. Right?
Yeah, it might be. So, you got a degree in baloney. Oops.
Oh, you watch out there.
That was from Futurama. That was just a quote, everybody. That wasn't my opinion, I guess. So
let's leave it at that. I mean, that's kind of our idea for next week, and we want to kind of to throw some of that stuff out there for our listeners and give them an insight into what we want to talk about, but also in our heads at least kind of cement the direction that we want to go with it.
Yeah, very true.
All right. We'll see you next week.
All right. Signing off.